Hello everyone. Right, let me just grab some iron brew. The bot may be working, it may not be. Hello to Twitch and YouTube. Everything's looking good. Let's see if the tweet has gone out at the time it was supposed to. It's always a fun question. Has the tweet gone out? And where is the iron brew? Where is the iron brew? There should be iron brew around here somewhere. I'm sure there's iron brew around here somewhere. Let's see. What have we got? That's... Oh, that could have worked for me, couldn't it? That could have worked. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? I'm currently having a lot of fun. And I'm trying to get the iron brew one-handed, whilst also trying to make sure that the messages which are supposed to go out on the various systems have gone out. Oh. Ah, well. Hello everyone! Could the USN have retrofitted and modernised the Oliver Hazard Perry frigates for extended life till replacement came along? Well, this is going to be a fun one, isn't it? It is going to be a fun one. And why have you done that? We literally did some recording 5 minutes ago and you were fine. I need to open questions. I probably do, but I also need to check the bot's working before I actually open the questions. That's my current plan anyway. And even then, why are you going off? I do not know, bot. You and I are... Camera? I like you. But seriously, sometimes you and I are going to have issues. So. Let me check. Is the bot actually happy and running? It should be. Yeah, everyone currently pushing for the bot to be open, including the admins doing it. Until it's running, I'm not going to make it go open, am I? I love you all dearly, and I realise you are very eager to put in some questions. But there is no point me saying, bot open, I'll take questions, until the bot is working. As soon as the bot is working, I will tell it to open. Until then, until there's a little orange sign here, hold fire on the questions, please. Hold fire on the questions. Right then. Let me just try to find some iron brew. Also, like I noted, I'm not ineffective without iron brew. I just merely function at 110% rather than 170. Oh. I'm glad to hear that, Big Ruby 601. I'm glad that you've got another subset to dive into. So, let's see. Is bot working? It claims to be. It claims to be. So let's see if that works. If I get a message saying it's open and working, that's good, and I'll put up the sign. So how's everyone doing this evening? Yes, we are talking about the OHPs. Yes, We're talking about frigates. Now, before I dive into this too much, I'm going to start off with, there is a current myth going around certain sections of the internet. I have no idea where it came from. And it basically goes along like this. The USN is a destroyer navy. It's always been a destroyer navy. Destroyer navies are superior by definition to frigate navies. Okay, let's start off with Aegis sail frigates were kind of the big thing for the US Navy, so they've definitely not always been a destroyer navy. The destroyer is a relatively recent addition to the US Navy, even in their history. Secondly, and I do mean this in the nicest way, Steve Clarke's premiere on the Tiger is listed twice. Yeah, that's because I've moved something around and I haven't put a change around. That's because it's holding position for me, something at night. Thank you. Yeah, questions are now open. That's good. Let's hope the questions actually work. Now, also, there is the fact that, as a rule, yes, destroyer is more is larger, usually more flexible than a frigate. In modern parlance, it often is, but also it's more expensive usually than a frigate. A well-designed frigate will deliver on roughly the 60% rule. They will do 60% of functions of a destroyer for about 50% of the price. So it becomes a balance in terms of your force structure. And if you want to be a very large navy present around the world, you probably do need to have a mixture of the two. That is probably sensible. So, destroyer-only navy. No. That's not the case. However, frigate-only navy, well, the trouble is for the US Navy, and I mean this in the nicest way when it comes to frigates, they do not have the best run with them. They've been very good at producing escort destroyers, which got even more and more powerful, and again ended up with some things like the Spruance class, which were really good destroyers, but ASW destroyers. They've produced some very good general-purpose destroyers, in terms of the Arleigh Burkes. Now, when you start talking about the tin cans, aka the OHPs, aka the frigates of the US Navy, you very quickly start to find people flitting between two options. The two options usually are something lines of, they are amazing, they are wonderful, they are perfect in every way, shape or form, or they're terrible, useless, and nowhere near good enough for the US Navy. As nice as these two ideological groups, and I am going to call them ideological camps, because once you're seeing the world in such black and white over a ship, especially a class as large as 71 plus ships built for the US Navy and other navies, once you start going down that route of that, they are, we're going to be black, everything's going to be either one way or the other way. You are no longer looking at the evidence. You are in an ideological spectrum. You fall into one camp or another. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. You can very easily fall into that. I have seen it happen myself. I've watched people try and put me into camps with things. And usually they're trying to coach me into the camp, trying to get me onto their side. Because, for whatever reason, they want me to agree with them. And I sit there and go, but it's not that simple. Life is never that simple. The OHPs are certainly not that simple. The OHPs were built to provide numbers. Again, let's reiterate that. The OHPs were built to provide numbers. They are frankly one of the most utilitarian designs that has ever been built. There is not the whole phrase of not a pound for air to ground, because we are so functional and focused on air to air in the F-22, has nothing on these. I'm not sure. The US Navy could have got away. I'm fairly sure if they'd fought benches would have been more utilitarian than individual seats. There would have been benches in them. For everything. Calling them tin cans is probably nice. Admittedly, tin can sailors usually refers to World War II destroyers, etc. But when you start looking at these things, you're going, they are literally just a can, which has had stuff chucked in them. Now, the point is, though, that doesn't make them bad. The OHPs were basic, not cheap. They were basic, not cheap. Cheap is when you buy things, when you go, oh, I want to still claim I have this fancy capability, but I'm going to buy the lowest price version of it. That barely works, but I can still claim I have that capability. Basic is when you go, do I need that capability to function? Let me put it this other way. If I buy a base model Nissan, it's going to be a perfectly fine car. Wouldn't it? It would be a perfectly fine brand new car. It wouldn't be cheap. It would be basic, though. However, there are many theoretically more luxurious brands where you buy the base model of something and it's very much a cheap version of it. It's you've bought the badge, you haven't bought a decent version of the badge. Again, please put in the chat which cars fit that definition for you. I can think of a few, but I am, of course, going to be a very nice content creator, and I'm not going to say them. But you can all think of ones where, frankly, the badge is keeping them up, not anything else. So this is what we're talking about with the OHPs. But the trouble is, when we start talking about this as a definition of basic versus cheap, often the two get conflated because the price tags can look similar. And it can look like, well, if I buy this cheap variant, I have more capabilities than this basic system. And it's true. On paper, you have more capabilities. But a basic system is more reliable. And will keep working and keep chugging along. And this is the point. So often when we're talking about frigates for navies like the US Navy, which is going to have a large number of destroyers, which is going to have a large number of high-end escorts, they are not looking for a cheap ship, they are looking for a basic ship. And I think this has been an ongoing issue with a lot of their procurements. And a lot of the misunderstanding when people go, what you really need is an OHP successor. Because people look at it and think, well, we want a cheap ship then. No, what you mean is you want a basic ship. Basic. Not cheap. Now, with this fun being the case, and this being the reality, what were the HPs for? They're for anti-submarine warfare operations. They're for convoy protection. They're for providing extra numbers in your carrier battle group. They are for assisting in a large number of parts of the battle space. And they are for assisting in large parts of presence mission. When you start to look at this class, you start going, well, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with something which is roughly 4,000 tons. Technically 4,200 fully loaded. And we're going to get into the variants as the time goes on, but let me put it this way. I have a big problem with the naming of the frigates, okay? There are two batches of frigates, and I have a big problem with how they're named, and I'm going to explain why. They have a 14-meter beam, and that's 45 foot. They have A 22 foot. That's a 6 point. If I remember correctly, it's a 6.73 meter draft, or something like that. Is 22 foot. Um, They have some General Electric LM2500 gas turbines. They have some. Well, they have both a single shaft and some auxiliary propulsion units to help them get home and provide assistable azimuth um, maneuvering for ASW operations and docking, which is useful. They're capable of doing 30 knots. They've got a range of 4,500 nautical miles at 20 knots. They have a fairly basic but not bad radar system for its time. And you must remember, we are talking about time. The first one of these is commissioned, Oliver Hazard Perry, is laid down in June 1975 and commissioned in 1977. There are often discussions when I see their equipment being compared to ships which are built in the 1980s and the 1990s, and then people going, this is a terrible design. It's not. It's what they're built with. They're upgraded as time goes on, but there is a limit to how much you can upgrade it. They start off with the ANSPS 49. They also tend to have the ANSPS 55 added later, I think. Mostly. It's added to the extent it's added in the beginning, but there are some of them, I think, which got something added later, but we'll talk about it as we go on. And the Mark 92 fire control system. They have a sonar, they have a towed array, they have all the systems they need. They're armed with a Mark 13 missile launcher. That's a single arm system. You can see it prominently on the front. And that had a 40 missile magazine, which could fire SM-1 MRs and harpoons. Unfortunately for them, the SM-1 was retired, and so the US Navy started removing it from their ships because they didn't need them. It has some ASW torpedoes, 2 triple launchers. It had an Otto Malera 76mm gun, which is very useful. 20mm phalanx as well, also quite useful. And various sort of systems added in. Most importantly, they carried a couple of lamps, that is, of the, the Light Airborne Multi-Purpose System, aka helicopters. aka, they tend to carry some Seahawks. Sea Sprites originally on the first batch, Seahawks on the second batch. They were a good and useful vessel system. They're also there to escort amphibious task groups. Now, I would say carrier battle groups are something that gets added in later with the second batch, more than the first batch. I would say the first batch are definitely more built around the concept of merchant convoys and amphibious task groups and those sort of operations, and supporting logistic ships. But yeah, these vessels are certainly built around being a capable, flexible system. And being a useful system. And I say that as I quickly try and check that Twitch is working properly. Because I just got a note saying it wasn't. So if I'm distracted a second, that's why. Yeah, it's working. That's it. Boy. Now, as ships go, they are perfectly serviceable. They are perfectly utilitarian. They are basic. But they work. Now, with that being said, their service and retirement. Well, let's start off with their service. Their service they come in, they're quite useful, but the US Navy starts looking ahead and going, okay, we really need to make these vessels better for supporting us in other operations. What do you mean other operations? We mean carrier battle groups. Okay, so you wanted to get them to good for carrier battle groups. Yeah, we do. Well, I have an idea of how we can make them slightly better. And this is one of many stories about how this happens, but this is the point. Okay? The original ones are 136 meters long. Overall length. The long-hauled ones are 138 meters long for overall length. I.e., they have gone up 2 meters. I.e., they have grown less than 2%. Less than 2%. So please, for all things holy, can we please refer them to batch 1 and batch 2? Because 2 meters does not make it longer! It's like saying, you've grown less than 2%, sir. You are now a giant. No, I'm not. That's an inch. It is. This is one of the most annoying things I find. It's sometimes you look at these ships, you go to these ships and go, the name that's given to them, the batch 3 Type 22s, are the broad-beamed Type 22s, the broad ones. Go and look at the beam difference, and you're going, what the frigate are you on? Seriously. It's like, you're going to call this a broad-beamed asset because it's grown by, what? 0.2 meters? 0.2? 20 centimeters? That's not broad of beam. And honestly, perhaps the batch 3 could have been called the long Type 22s, because if you consider the original batch 1 Type 22s were 131 meters, and the batch 3s were 148 meters. So they had grown by roughly 17 meters, which at least is over 10%. It's darn near pushing on for 14%. That is actually a length growth. 2 meters does not equal long. Now, I agree. No replacement is a dumb move, and we'll be getting into that, Bravo country. But yeah, thank you for the super chat, and yes, it was a dumb move. Yeah, but I know this is a small rant for me. I do realise, I just find sometimes some of the naming conventions of these ships, and you get there and go, you're calling it the long one because it's gained 2 meters. Let's put it this way. I bet if you find a picture of a short and a long hull next to each other, you won't be able to tell unless you're literally on a picture which is vertically overhead that one is longer than the other. Now, what was really important about the long hull ships was also they got the Seahawk. They could, the smaller ones could the short hull ships would more often be carrying the Sea Sprite, which is less capable, and the longer ones carried the Seahawk. But still, it's not that difference. Now, theoretically, there is an interesting thing here, because when you start to look at the flight designations of them, the short are listed as Flight 1 in some sources. However, the long is listed as Flight 3, and no one lists what Flight 2 is. So, my presumption would be the Flight 2s are some of the ships which are ordered around that sort of period, which are built for foreign navies. Either that, or they had Flight 2 only exist as a design study. In which case, that doesn't really make sense, because traditionally we reserve flight designations and actual official ones for when the ships are actually being built. Because if you did keep the thing of, if it's a design study, it still counts, then the Burkes would be on Flight 4 already. Because there's a Flight 3 study of the Burkes going on in the 1990s about them being, which isn't delivered on. And if you look at the Flight 3 Burke versus the Burke they're actually building, the first thing you'll notice is to deal with the expected expansion of the bridge structure, it's got longer and beamier. So you don't have these things sticking out over the sea, and it looks a bit like a mushroom from a certain angle. I say this as someone who likes the Burkes, but there is a certain angle where you look at them and go, the bow sort of the hull goes up like sort of this, and then it goes out. And in. And that does kind of look like a mushroom. If you want proof, go look at them yourself, and you will see. And once you've seen it, and this was explained to me actually by a naval architect, you can't unsee it. As much as you want to unsee it, you cannot unsee it once you have seen it. Now, their service was pretty darn good, though. As a class, they did a fairly large number of operations. They were fairly capable. They took part in quite a lot of different combat operations. And, we've got things like Stark here. USS Stark. A good ship. A capable vessel. She's attacked by Iraqi aircraft. She's struck by 2 Exocet missiles. And yet, she survives. She's not stricken till 1999. She is hit by these missiles in 1987. Here's a thing to think about. Yes, she is hit in the Persian Gulf. Yes, the frigate's radar did not detect the missiles. It's the lookout which gives warning. But this is speaking as a British naval historian. 5 years previously in the Falklands War, the Exeter has taken out a fairly large number of a couple of British ships. Mostly because the Brits hadn't really been prepared for the Exeter as they should be. And the Americans had 5 years later had managed to work out some of the things about it. But also, I would argue, because the OHP is a very tough ship. It might be a frigate, but it is one tough little frigate. Again, basic, not cheap. I tend to be the type who likes to buy basic drill bits, okay? In other words, if I see drill bits which have the very fanciest brand names on them, I naturally skew away from them. But I tend to look through the drill bits that are on sale in the various stores when I go to, when I need to get a drill bit, and I go for the ones which look like they have the right machining. Look like they have actually been made properly, have got a consistent turn to them. And then, of course, I look at the prices. And I'm not going to go for the cheapest, because that usually doesn't bear out. But usually, if you're looking around, you will find a fairly decent make which has got a basic range. And you will find a fairly decent drill bit. These are basic ships. They are tough. Then you've got Soundby Roberts, which was nearly sunk by a mine. They're no deaths this time. 10 sailors had to be taken off for medical treatment and looked after. But, yeah. The ship was saved. They were returned to service after, after some work in shipyards. And Roberts, the one which is sunk on my mind, isn't decommissioned till 2015. She serves till 2015. And then you got the Simpson, which was escorting the Wainwright, a Belknap class vessel. Let's be honest, it's a destroyer leader. It's not a cruiser. It's really bad as a cruiser as part of the U.S. Navy's, well, U.S. Congress's attempt to tell the U.S. Navy, no, there is no cruiser gap with the Soviets. Look, we're rebadging your ships as cruisers. And Simpson is the one which takes out the Yushan, the gunboat from the Iranian Navy. She takes them out with SM-1s, not harpoons, SM-1s. And it's similar when you go through their service with other navies. These vessels have been very useful. Now, there are problems with upgrading them, because the US Navy really didn't put in a lot of space for growth. That's on the US Navy's design. But the thing is, that's if you go with the existing design. The fact is, it's a surprisingly modular design. It's surprisingly flexible. It's surprisingly capable of being adapted. It's one of those things of, when you look again at a basic design, usually everything's designed to be functional. And that means it's functionally positioned within the ship, which means you can usually orientate and start moving around. Almost, this is the point I would describe the OHPs. They are almost accidentally modular, in that there are sections in their hull which are almost discrete sections. This is the power section, this is the weapons section, this is the command section, this is the combination section. And you can almost go through the hull and go, okay, yeah, I need to expand that bit. I need to arrange this bit. I need to do this. And you can use that. And here's the other thing to think about with the OHPs. There are a few sisters from another misters that are still serving. Now, I'm hoping I use that phrase correctly, because I did check with my cousins today, and my little cousins told me sister from another mister is the correct phrasing for this one. Because this is basically, they are sister ships of the class, but they are built by other nations. So they are sisters from another mister. Yeah. I'm a historian, but I'm down with the kids. Yeah. I'm cool. I get the lingo. Anyway, so what we got there is the ROCS Tiandan, which is the 1106. And she was commissioned only in 2004. Think about that. The Republic of China Navy still commissioning OHPs in 2004. She was the 8th and final vessel of the Shenkung class. She is a lovely ship, a very capable ship. And even then, if you're thinking about it going, that is not that long ago. That is 22 years ago. When we talk about the OHPs, when we talk about Oliver Hazard Perry herself, she was commissioned in 1977. In simple terms, there are 27 years between the first vessel the class commissioned and the last vessel of this sort of wider group of OHPs commissioned. 27 years. And a large number of them have served many, many more years. Then we've got Canaris. She was commissioned in 1994. The 6th Santa Maria class of the Spanish Armada, the Spanish Navy. This is her. Okay, this is the Tiandan, the one at the front. And if you're thinking, well, Alex, is she out of service yet? Because, you know, surely, if she was commissioned in 1994, okay, yes, it is 5 years after the Ingram, which is the last of the US Navy's ones, but, you know, They were decommissioned in 2015. You know, surely she could... No, she's still in service. Still providing flexibility. On the books to be replaced, but let's be honest, she's still a useful ship. 31-ish years later, 32-ish years later. And she's still working fine. The Spanish are perfectly happy with her. Is she expected to be their frontline solo combat vessel? No, but this is the weird thing about frigates. They're not expected to be that role for a lot of navies when we're talking about the capability force. You're often going to have frigates which are your good all-rounder backstops, which are there to round out your forces, which have capabilities which are capable, not cutting edge, but capable. But the thing is, cutting edge is always moving. The cutting edge, the bleeding edge of science, technology, of weapon systems is always moving. It's always advancing. So it's very easy for you to drop out of that position. The mucky middle is a far larger melange. It is a far larger creature, which has far more space and far more utility. And you can survive in there for quite a long time. Now, there are also vessels in service which are former US Navy ones, currently serving Pakistan, Poland, Bahrain, and others. They're still serving. They're still serving other nations. After US Navy decommissioned and got rid of them, they are still serving others. Now, the thing is, as ships get older, they get more expensive to operate. Alright? Their hull starts to wear out. Their electronics need replacing more often. Everything starts to go. It gets more difficult to get spare parts on them because you probably don't have a production line for those parts anymore. And you are starting to run on spares, so you might have to do a limited machine run. And all these things add up to make your life more complicated. Or you might need to re-engine them because it's cheaper to re-engine them and actually get parts for the engine. All those things are true. All those things are realities of operating these ships. But it is viable fleet. It is more, you know, reality. Oh. So you're saying hanging out TwitchCon shows in lingo. But the thing is, they're still useful. Again, basic will often be useful long after cheap has fallen apart and is no longer useful. Because again, cheap when we're talking about defense procurement, as often means these ships are at the systems are just at the cutting edge, but are not quite, and they're going to quickly drop off. And quickly you're going to start looking in terms of reliability, in terms of maintenance, in terms of time. To keep them viable is just an on-running expense. It's just annoying. Now, this being said, there is an almost reactivation of the OHPs. In 2017, John M. Richardson, under the first Trump presidency, when there was being proposed a 355 ship plan for the US Navy, did look at reactivating the OHPs. They decided it would cost too much. And realistically it would. If you consider, whilst those ships had been deactivated, many of them in 2015, they had been deactivated looking like this. Many of them had lost their Mark 13 missile launcher with no replacement forward. Many of them had other systems removed. They are capable of assisting with Coast Guard operations, but they are not what the US Navy wants going anywhere near even a moderately interesting war zone, let alone an actually active one. And you can point out it's the Mark 13, the loss of the Mark 13 missile launcher. Yes, it is. It's the loss of the systems that go over and everything without replacement. No one had replaced them. And why hadn't they? Because, let's be honest, if you've not got this line under production, and you've got the Berks to put the money in, you're going to put the money into Berks, or the LCS, or the Zilmont class, all these things going up. You're not going to put it in the class which is phasing out. It's throwing good money after bad. There are still some vessels, I think, still at the ship maintenance facility in Philadelphia, Naval Inactive ship facility in Philadelphia. I'm not sure how many there are there. There are discussions. I think one of them potentially is the Halliburton, because the reason I remember that one is because I know there have been multiple steps where people have been considering trying to put it into museums, but I think those have all failed. I think the Halliburton is still there, but I'm not 100% sure. But what can I say? The reactivation was looked at. It was looked at their growing needs, and it was basically a case of this is going to cost too much to get them into service at a standard which we want to operate them. There is also the point, yes, the US Navy standardization can save a lot of money. It can save a lot of money. But I would say also that the US Navy has some good ideas about standardization. Then comes Congress. And if we're going to be nice, we'll say patronage system. If we're being less nice, we'd say poor barrel, politics. Yeah, standardization goes... ouch. It's the reality of it. But so, to answer this question in short, before we get to what I'm going to talk about as a sort of alternate history, the answer is really no. You can't do this. But there is a way things could have worked out. And there is a way they almost did. But as that said, we've just got to the shameless book plug by saying thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing to the channel, helping it grow, all those things. You might have noticed we have kind of reached a high number recently. The channel has kind of got to 20,907. And I'm still not sure what happens, but I think we might get to 21,000 soon. I don't know if we're going to make to 25,000 by Christmas. I will hope we do. But it's thank you to everyone who's made it this possibility. Now, with that being said, I'm going to try and get Discord to work and release the questions. If the questions don't work in Discord, though, I will have to read them from the backup server, and I won't be displaying that because the backup server is not my server. And I wouldn't be rude and display it when it's not my server, if that makes sense. Right, let's... Yeah, that's not quite... The questions aren't working now. Okay. Alright. Thank you. So... Alright. Knights Different. Why did I think I've answered Knight's first question of why did the US Navy go for short hull and long hull in the first place? Literally, there's a whole debate as to whether they're Flight 1 and Flight 3, but also because someone decided that was what they were, because, it makes sense. They are small, they're 2 meters longer, so it's a long hull. Timu, should the US have made the Perrys a specialized anti-submarine vessel? They pretty much are. They pretty much are a sub-hunter. That is literally what they are. Let's be honest. The big sensors they have, the top of the range ones, are their towed array sonar, are their hull-mounted sonar. The helicopters they carry, the torpedoes they have, they are ASW warfare vessels with additions. Did you see the news? The US Navy's railgun test firing again? Yes, but I have to admit my news today was kind of taken over by the fact that one of the Defence Secretary of Defence in the UK, has resigned over funding. Which I'm not surprised, because he got told there's a £26 billion gap in defence funding in the UK between the programmes we've signed, the cost of the programmes we've signed up to and our commitments we made, and the actual funding we've allocated. And then they promised him £18 billion and to work out a defence investment plan to deliver it. Okay, fine. It's not the full coverage, but you can make it work. You can cover enough, and then that was supposed to be downgraded to £13.5 billion. And I can understand why he's resigned, because basically they've gone, we're going to fund you at 50 pence on the pound. But don't worry, we do realise we're in a war at the moment, and it's a high-stress situation, so we need to fund defence. So we're going to fund you at 50 pence on the pound for what you need. Aren't we generous? And the guy resigned. Now, interesting enough, this usually leads to questions of why haven't the admirals and the generals, etc., resigned? Because honestly, for them resigning at the moment is not going to have enough of an impact in the political term. The government is unpopular enough. However, the difference is when the Secretary of State resigns, because he's quite a senior member of the government and quite a senior politician in the Labour Party himself. It's John Healey. Him resigning actually does have an impact on their internal politics in government and in Parliament, which causes them issues on other areas. Basically, he is not one of the people you want appearing in your backbenches when he's now going to be freed from the collective responsibility that our governments tend to operate under. So, yeah, that's going to be fun. Night Secret everyone, why did only 8 short-hulled Oliver Hazard Perry class frigates get built? Basically, that's the batch ones. And then they work out, oh no, if we actually want to work with the carriers, they need to be slightly longer. It makes the hull slightly more efficient. Nice ignorance. So if the USN got 55 more OHP, would they be long hull or short hull versions? That's the whole subject for the next part of the live. So nope, not answering that. Could whoever's ticking the questions in the backup Powder Monkey please not tick them? Let me tick them, because I need to keep track of where the questions are. I know it's someone trying to be helpful. I'm sure it's one of the admins. I'm not sure which one it is, but just calm down on being helpful. I know it's well intentioned, but it's not helping me. It's worrying me because I keep thinking I missed the question. How much could the OHP be stretched? That's an interesting question, because realistically there are 2 points in the hull where you could stretch it. So it's an interesting discussion to get into, and we're going to be discussing as we go through. And also from Volunteer Per Order Sullivan, how does the OHP compare to Type 17, not 42, DS300? I think they would have been conceived at the same time. Type 23, I think you mean. Not Type 17, potentially. Potentially Type 10. No, it wouldn't be Type 17. That wouldn't be in the 70s. Type 21, 22, and 23. 22 is a heavy frigate. 22 is a heavy frigate, but really that's the closest. When you start to look at the OHP, you start to go, well, what's the difference between that and Type 22? Basically, the Type 22 is being built by a nation which is going, we are going to require our frigates to be more principal assets than the US Navy. So we're going for basic but with better, basic but enhanced, and that's basically the Type 22s. They're all. It depends on what you need. Again, if your frigate is a major, let's put it this way: if you're the US Navy, You want a basic frigate because it's going to be a force multiplier. Okay? It's going to give you the extra ships in your task groups. It's going to give you that extra force. It's going to give you that extra capability in terms of your anti-submarine warfare. If you're a navy like the Royal Navy or the French Navy, a frigate is actually going to be a principal combatant. It's going to have to be, by nature of the numbers you have, is going to be a principal combatant. This is the thing which the British still don't understand when they're ordering Type 23s. And look at the poor Type 23s and all the stuff they ended up in. They really needed to be built as a principal combatant, not a light frigate, a principal combatant. And, yeah. Apparently, yeah, there was the... But a lot of those designs, the 17, the 18, the 19, I think the 20, ended up also folding into the Type 22 program in terms of their stuff, in terms of their capabilities. But again, you're looking more light frigate options, then you're looking more Type 18, I think, than 17 from memory. Because that's the program which leads to eventually the Type 21 being ordered, and the Type 23 comes from some of the studies done with the Type 18 from memory. It's a fun piece of history. Aidan Clarke. Thoughts on Canada and NATO interest in inquiring Saab globalize the new AWACS? It's a useful system. It is a very useful system, and it makes sense. Honestly, there's been so much mucking around with the wedge tail. That's the trouble. There's been so much mucking around with it and its capabilities that, frankly, it's kind of shot itself in the foot as a program. When you're buying AWACS, you're looking for not just the best sensor system you're getting, you're looking for something which is a reliable program, because it is going to be the backstop of your defense infrastructure for a very, very long time. You look at the Sentry and look at how long that was in service for, and then you start talking... I'm surprised more of us aren't going for the Hawkeye, but there again, the Hawkeye's kind of limited versus the Saab option. So I can, in terms of the numbers of personnel it can carry, and if you cannot rely on the wedge tail, the Saab is a very good thing to go for. It's a very good asset. And when I say rely on it, I mean rely on continued investment in the program and continued interest in the program. Because when the principal partner in a program announces they're not interested in it, then everyone else is kind of going to go, okay, you might be able to afford all those satellites and all that fancy system. We can't. We still need an airborne version. And if you're not going to be involved in this and directing it, because you were supposed to be the principal in this, we're going to buy from someone else. I think the interesting thing is going to see what the nations which did adopt the E7, Australia, the UK, etc., do next. Because for the UK, our E7 fleet is pathetically small. I mean, the only thing which is... Then we have a slightly bigger than that in terms of our Poseidon fleet, but that is also pathetically small for what we need it to do. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. Callum Gaswick, do we have data about maintenance costs of Parry's versus Burke? The OHPs were very cheap to maintain. As through life expenses, as I said, as you get older, they get more expensive. But it's one of the things of, there would have been ways to keep it cheaper. And also, one of the things you can point to, people point to, is they get, especially in later life, they go, well, the costs are rising versus the Burks, which are playing sort of staying currently, constant. What they forget is the Burks are in a constant production line. So, that does have fun. Yeah. It doesn't. And now people are going, the E7 is based. Yeah, the E7 is based on the Boeing, but the trouble is, it's based on a Boeing aircraft, which is a fine airliner, the 737. There have been different variants who've had issues, but it was quite a common aircraft with a lot of slayers. But that's not the thing you're talking about. You're talking about the radar systems, the command and control systems, all that integration. because you have to integrate all these systems with things. And it's one thing buying into a system when you think someone else is going to be buying another 100 of them or something, and therefore the cost for integrating these systems with all your allied partners and everything for the so they work together so they can get the interoperability which works is going to be borne as a collective group by everyone. And then the person who's going to order 100 drops out, suddenly thinking the costs go up and the ongoing costs of the integration go up. Bravo Crunchy, hello. Why does it seem the US abandon a high-low concept for its capabilities? They want every hull to do every mission. US Air Force equally guilty. Okay, you're dealing with an interesting time period where you get into a kind of negative spiral. I've talked about this before, where you have less hulls or less aircraft, and so you need them to be able to do more missions and be a component in more missions. So you need to give them more capability. Adding this more capability into these hulls and into these aircraft means they get more expensive because they need more computers, they need more capability with weapon systems, they need more power to support those computers. That all takes up more space, which requires a larger ship, etc., all these things, and more crew. And that then makes the ships more expensive, which means the aircraft more expensive, which means then you buy less, which means you need them to do more, and it becomes an ever-ending circle of we buy less, so we need individual ships to do more, makes them more expensive, so we buy less, and you just do this never-ending circle. That's happened, so. Order 7. Well, sorry, was the big debrief successful? Yes, it was. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of success. Steve, one of the admins, actually did video us, and when he sends the videos through, I think we're going to actually. I'm going to post the video of the presentation I gave into the Patreon system, so the people in Patreon can go and look at it. I don't want to post it publicly as they have their own channels and things, and if they want to do it, they can do it. I don't think they're going to do that with the video. They're going to putting up, and there's all sorts of things I need to talk about with them. But they did a really good thing, and it was a really good conference. Leeds was very nice. The Royal Armouries was very nice. The people who are there will know that I was very complimentary about the Royal Armouries. It was all wonderful. There's one section I had problems with, but the rest of it was wonderful. But no, it was very, very good, and the staff there were lovely. And I brought my mum home a stuffed armoured elephant, which has made her very happy. But for some reason, she thinks she needs a couple of them, and she also needs to think she needs to be able to dress up as Hannibal at this year's Halloween costumes. So Hannibal the General, please note. So that might have been a stupid thing for me to do. I might have created a rod for my own back, but we'll see what happens. Team, should the European NATO members consider to have their own clone of OHP spread across the member nations to do the anti-submarine work? Look, there are a lot of NATO nations which actually bought the OHP. There are good reasons to buy the OHP. I would say it's not sensible to go back today and go, I'm just going to copy and paste the OHP and start building it in 2026. That's not going to work. The world has moved on. But yeah, that is the sort of thing that's the sort of program which they're really looking forward to. They're looking forward to it with the NF90 and all those things. They're looking for a sort of frigate program that everyone could buy into. Knights, this isn't the question you've asked me, but I'm going to answer it quickly because you put it in the chat. You have to wonder why the Boeing 737-700ER airliner was chosen rather than the 737-800 or the 737-900. I can tell you that very easily. It's price. It was cheaper to buy. The Frem is not the modern OHP, Jeff. No, the Frem is not. There is nothing basic about the Frem. The Frem is flexible, but it is not basic. The Frem is a frontline frigate designed for the Italian and French navies to do different roles, but it is a frontline frigate. It is not a basic frigate. The Frem is not that. The Frem is not the OHP. Closest OHP design you'd have at the moment, which is basic, not cheap. You're going to be arguing between the Type 31 and the frigate the Intervention, not the Frem. You're going to be arguing. Mogamis are not the Mogamis are good, but they're sort of basic plus, and that's the point about the Mogamis, which makes them so interesting. They're basic plus. The FDI and the Type 31s, they're basic. The Frem is not basic. The Frem is far too good, far too spec'd up to be called basic. So, starting off where we were, could they have been kept going? No. In the nicest way, by the time they're being got rid of, they are being well used. They put on many thousands of miles on their clocks. The US Navy was not shy about sending them everywhere they wanted to, and everywhere they didn't think they needed a ship, they still sent them. They sent them everywhere and anywhere. And also, when you start to look at the systems of the older ones which are in the service, they really needed some work. You cannot reconsider this picture again from earlier. That ship is missing its Mark 13. You need to replace that. If you want to keep in service, you have to replace that. They didn't. And, Jeff, yeah, I know, there are lots of claims about the International Light Frigate and various other systems being a modern OHP. Until it's actually built, we have no idea. I have this discussion with yards quite often because the claims that will come from the marketing department and what the naval architects would actually say are very different. And you usually have to remember that there is usually a business department, there is usually the naval architecture department, they talk to the business department, who then talk to the marketing department. They do not like to have the marketing departments talk to the actual engineers and architects. And that becomes a whole thing. So sometimes the people in marketing are marketing based on the information transmitted by the business people. And the business people have already usually, and I'm using this phrase, I'm sorry to use it, but I'm going to use it, set things up a bit to make it look more attractive to buyers. So if when I see the marketing department's claims of, this ship is going to be easy to build, I go, show me to your construction yard. Let me see it being built. And then I'll tell you if it's easy to build or not. Now, the problem with the Perrys is that because they were crammed with stuff, when they were built, they didn't build them as big as they could build them. Because they were crammed with stuff, some of the stuff was actually built to the frames and built into them, which makes it very difficult to replace. And so you would have had to do massive rebuilds. You can't justify owning ships that old. You would have had to do full weapons refits. Again, it's going to be expensive. You can't justify owning ships that old. So the only way you could have kept them going is if you kept the Mark 13 going and the SM-1MR going, and you're not going to do that because the US Navy, frankly, doesn't need the headache of maintaining that missile system along with all the others they're maintaining. So, With this being said, and I was considering this option, what could have been done? Well, USS Ingram is the point I'm talking about here, because she's laid down in March 1987 and is commissioned August 1989. 2 years later. Now, here is the thing. When they're doing it, they are actually considering ordering more. They are considering another batch. They don't do it because of NFR 90, the NATO Frigate Replacement Program 90. Because the US Navy is getting into that, and they think that's going to produce their future frigate. So they're entering off the books. But, and they've got the books coming in. So they end off the OHPs. But let's put it this way: if the US Navy had been run, and Congress had been run by people who were less prepared to bet everything on a multinational program, and maybe thought, you know what, I'd like a bit of a backup option, they could have kept a production line of 1 to 2 of these being built every other year going. Previous ones had ended service in 1987. That means 2 ended service in 1987. One had ended service in 1986 and a couple in 1985. That's from memory. Now, the thing is, if you keep it to the level of we're going to order them so that they take roughly 2 years to build. We're going to order another one. We're going to keep ordering them every couple of years, and we're going to keep the production line going. Maybe they order one a year, and therefore they just have one coming into service every year, or they order one every other year, but they decide to keep them going. Now the thing is, it doesn't take that long for them to enter from between 1989 and it to end up in 1994. Cold War's ended. War's going to keep building. US Navy enters a period of indecision and, not sure what. And then at that point, kind of like the Burkes, the OHPs would be the current program, the safe choice, the safe option. They would be under construction. They'd be being built. And I wouldn't be surprised if they just kept being built. Now, there is some really interesting scenarios when you start doing this, because if the US Navy has an ongoing production line of OHPs, as we discussed earlier, when we talked about the sisters from another mister here, the other options, there are lots of other nations which would be interested in them. And that production line could start very quickly generating foreign orders in the late 1990s. There are lots of nations which could go, you know what, I might as well buy into the OHP program. There are lots of nations which already buy basically into the Burke program and build their destroyers based off the Arleigh Burke. And there are lots of nations which already did historically buy Oliver Hazard Perrys. If you have an ongoing production line, they probably start getting bought. And that again lowers the price for the US Navy to keep buying them. Now, the question becomes, what are they actually buying? It's not going to be long before it should be working. It seems to be happy. So, with that being said, yeah, basically, I wouldn't be surprised if you do see some technologies start to migrate down. Some technologies come back. No idea what the connection issues that happen then. I do apologise. Things which you could start to see coming into the service, and some things which you sort of see being capabilities that are put forward for it. Well, you're probably going to see Mark 41 VLS. Okay? This is the OHP. Where do I want to put Mark 41 VLS? I probably want to put it forward. Now, the thing is, what I'm going to probably want to do is take out the Mark 13 launcher, which 40 missiles stored beneath, and I'm going to want to use that hull space and try and adapt that hull space to a Mark 41 VLS. Probably what I'm going to need to do is lengthen the hull a bit. Okay? Now, here's the question. How am I going to deal with this? Because Harpoon doesn't go into Mark 41 VLS. So I'm probably going to have to send them to quad launchers. So I'm going to have 2 quad launchers probably for them. So that's going to be 8 Harpoons sitting off. Okay, that's fine. Probably going to put the Harpoons somewhere on the superstructure. Maybe mount them like the Taiwanese do, the Hyung Feng. Sort of in this sort of area. Mount them up there. 2 quad box launchers. Yeah, that should work. That should work. And then I've got to think about what kind of VLS. Well, again, if I'm only thinking of 40 VLS, 40 missiles, nice way a 32 cell system would do. I could put in a 48 cell system. Remember, they're multiples of 8. A 32 cell system is 4 blocks of 8 sitting out the front here. They could be angled lengthwise. They could be, I can work out how. I could maybe go to 6 systems if I do lengthen the hull. I could put 48 into there. And that would be the sensible option. That would be useful. The audio should not be dead. I am getting audio response from my system, so if audio is dead, someone tell me. And the thing is also, with Enhanced Sea Sparrow, you start going, well, okay, so here is the thing. If I have 48 cells, I can have 32 SM2s in there. I can have 8 ASRock in there, and I can have 32 ESSMs in there. And that becomes an issue. The audio is desynced. That's not nice. Why are you desyncing my audio? Okay. And, that suddenly makes it a very useful system. Because if you think about that, you add in and make it up to 48 VLS cells. And suddenly you're carrying the 8 Harpoons separately. Okay, so you've not lost them. You've got your 32 Mark SM2s, which you can deal with. And you've got 8 ASRock, which are very useful, thank you very much, for anti-submarine warfare. And got 32 ESMs. So you've got 64 surface-to-air missiles. And that's just going for 48 VLS cells. Suddenly you've got a pretty darn decent frigate for the 1990s, 2000s there. Now, ASRock's not part of the original arsenal, but it's an improvement. It adds it in. It also allows it to take over the role from the, let's be honest, what you were starting to retire. The Spruance class, the kids, as you sort of retire them, this can take on that role. You can keep the 76mm. You can keep the Phalanx close-in weapon system. You can keep these systems if you want to. And probably would do. Because they're useful. You can keep the 2 AAA torpedo launchers. You can keep the long hangar deck. Long flight deck as well. You can do all these things and find it useful. Please note I'm calling them Flight 3 and Flight 4. Because, as said, to my mind, calling the long-haul ones Flight 3 means there's a Flight 2 somewhere. And I ain't been able to find the Flight 2. So we're going to go with them being Flight 2, them being Batch 2 and Batch 1. They fulfill some of the missions of the Nox, of the Spruances, as they're going out. And that's a useful asset. It's also very much in the range of what the capabilities of this size hull can do. Now, what else are you probably going to have to do? Well, I wouldn't be surprised if a later flight includes things like new command and control. You might even get a variant of Aegis radar made for them. A cheap and cheerful basic radar. or rather basic Aegis, might be made for them. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they do get a basic Aegis, or if alternatively the Americans buy into one of the many radar systems which are available from European companies, which are fairly decent radars, and just have the data link, so they get the benefits of Aegis without actually having to carry and power it from the ship. I'm not sure what they do on that one. And if you keep this in production, if you keep this kind of production line going, you've suddenly got this in service. Okay? You've got this benchmark in service. Backing up the Burks. Backing up everything else. And, let me know in the chat. The nicest way, what do you think of that sounding like? What do you think that sounds like? To my mind, the 48 cell system has the advantage over the 32 cell option. They could go to 32 cells option. They could go with, I don't know, 16 standard missiles, 32 ESMs in 8 missiles and 8 ASROC. They could still do that. But, you know, what do you think about the 32 or 48? You probably wouldn't move the 76mm to the bow, because you've got limited space and you're going to need to use that space for VLS cells. So moving the 76mm to the bow actually takes into that space. As much as it would look better and look more sensible, it's probably going to stay where it is. I think, to my mind, what you end up with is basically Flight 3 is coming along going, yeah, this is working. This is capable. Now, it will have impacts on other areas. It will have a lot of impacts. But, again, think of it this way. If you've got these being produced at the same time as you're producing Burks, and you're basically building 2 Burks for every one of these you build, you probably still end up with your 75 Burks in service plus. You probably also end up with 30-something of these in service. And that becomes a useful force multiplier. Because that means you've got roughly 100 modern-ish escorts in the service. You've got 2 production lines going. Now, just to clarify what I said about maybe finding European radar, what would happen is the American Navy would go, we need a radar for this, but it's not going to be Aegis. We want something which is basic. And what would happen is Raytheon, or someone like that, would probably go across the Tails, THALES, and go, you know that medium radar system you have? Yeah, the one that's really good and lots of nations seem to be buying? Yeah. Can we produce a version of that under license in America? Yeah, you can. And they would turn around to the American government and go, look, we've got a brand new medium radar! See, it's American! I'm sorry, but it happens in all nations. There are some. It happens in America. It happens in Britain. It happens in France. It happens in all those nations where you have 2 options. You can spend a lot of money to develop a capability, and if you think you're going to get a lot of foreign sales, it's worthwhile doing so. Or you can buy a license build for a capability and then get a monopoly contract for your own country. Now, as this all happens, you probably have, what would the impact be on the US Navy? Well, the Burks, well, maybe still get the LCS, actually, interesting enough, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the thing is, the big point is this reduces the pressure on the Burks. The Burks are not having to do everything. They're not taking away for everyone. There is someone else who can take the lead in the ASW operation. The Burks, as good as they're in ASW, get to stand back and go, okay, we support these ships, and these are the lead for ASW, we're the lead for air defense and land attack. Which probably helps the Burks out quite a lot in terms of their hull utility, but also in terms of carrier escorts, in terms of operations ongoing, these things. When you're starting to put these ships together, there is something which is working. Now, with that being said, it's also going to have an impact in terms of the LCS procurement in that the littoral combat ships are not going to need to be DASW warfare leads. That's not going to pass their fit. Okay? The littoral mission is going to be mine hunting, amphibious warfare operations and escort, inshore operations, littoral operations, operations in that space. You think about it, you take ASW warfare off the LCS program, and suddenly you've actually made the LCS program about 50% less complicated. Also, suddenly you go, well, we need to provide an escort for them. Okay. Well, we have a frigate, which does carry some standard missiles, as well as the ESMs. Okay, that can escort them. So you suddenly need to go. You suddenly start thinking, oh, this capability. Now, the interesting thing is at this point, if you've got the LCS program coming in, and I can see this with the successive flight coming in, you might well get people go, well, why don't we move from the 76mm to 57mm, so there's commonality between new HPs coming in service and the LCS if we've gone to 57mm route still? Or maybe they go to 76mm route instead of 57mm route with the LCS because they've got the 76mm still in service and it's available and it's got all these flexibilities. That could happen either way. Radar system as well is a good example of where maybe they go, well, hang on, okay, so there's some good radar options here. There are some good radar options. We'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can provide. And there are options once you start looking into them. The Independence class had, of course, the Sea Giraffe, the Saab radar, the ANSPS 77 as their radar system. I think the Freedom class and they have the same. Let me check. Newts. Oh no, they had the EADS. The Airbus TRS 3D system. So, both of them had very good European radars. So there's lots of options for what the OHPs could be fitting with and carrying with. Again, adapted for home production. And suddenly, this becomes an option. In fact, in this scenario, if the littoral combat ships enter service and you no longer look at them going, are you able to do carrier escort role? Are you able to do this? No, you can focus in on the littoral strike mission, these operations. Suddenly they can be a far better hull, they can be far more focused on these missions, and they could actually be considered more successful. Think about this. An LCS which has a, let's say, 50% drop in mission spread could suddenly actually be a more successful vessel. And more successful class. And you can go, and the US Navy can go, well, of course we can carry on. We've got a legacy platform for the anti-submarine warfare, so we can do the focus on the LCS. We've got the Burks as our legacy platform for air defense and massive firepower. And we've got the Oliver, the Perrys for providing anti-submarine warfare. And yes, the LCS are the cutting edge. And the scenario becomes, look, we've got two constant working programs. Two reliable programs that are churning out ships that are the backbone of our force structure, and these other ones are being built on that. And that makes everything slightly more successful and more viable. This is the point about the OHP. It is a good basic design. It is basic, not cheap, basic. And that means you can start moving stuff around. If you look at this ship, you very quickly look out command section, power section, hangar and hangar and guns, missiles, forward. That's it. It's blocked down. You can very easily start to work out from the positions on the top where the things are. It is a very straightforward system. I want to expand the missile section. Okay, I need a longer bow space. Again, might as well go for 40. If I'm already changing it, I might as well add in 48 VLS cells. A discussion that people put out a 5-inch gun. If you wanted to put a 5-inch gun, it's got to be hull mounted. It can't be superstructure mounted because of the weight and the size of the hull. So you would have to muck around the hull even more. And at a certain point, you're not modifying the OHP. You're designing a new ship. Okay. So adding in VLS, you can get away with that. You're replacing the Mark 13 launcher anyway. It makes sense. Maybe replacing the 76mm 57mm up here makes sense again because it fits with the various systems you can put in there. Leaving phalanx, all these things, that makes sense. That's fine. That's not going to change it too much. But once you start going, okay, I want a 5-inch gun, I can understand why. But at that point, you're going, okay, right, and I need to rebuild the entire hull, because I need a forward position, probably, which is going to be large enough to take both the Mark 41 VLS I'm adding in and the 5-inch gun, and so it's going far longer, and you've changed design at that point far too much. You're not carrying on the existing design. At that point, you are at the Super Perry class. Honestly, this is an OHP. Honestly, Gov. It's kind of like the Hornet to Super Hornet, okay? As we talked about before. Honestly, they are the same. They are just an improved version of the previous aircraft. Honestly, Gov. Like, HMS Unicorn is a forward aviation support ship, not an aircraft carrier. Don't let your eyes be deceived every time you look at her. And the fact that when they're creating the light fleet carriers, they basically go copy, paste, delete bits. That's just luck. Not planning. So, you actually end up with a scenario where I could see you end up in a scenario where you actually end up with roughly 35, 36 of both the frigates and the LCS, still have 75-ish Burks, and suddenly that's your 140-something ship escort force. Now, the reality is it is going to need some upgrades. Someone's already asked about laser weapons against drones and all these things. Honestly, with a 76mm or 57mm and its explosive weapon system, it's got quite a bit of firepower against drones. If it needs a laser upgrade, that's fine, that's going to happen. When those lasers actually come into service, let's be honest, they're being tested, but they're not in massive widespread service yet. And yeah, you will need a power upgrade. In the nicest way I've already talked about, and you'd probably want a power upgrade at certain points. So there's lots of reasons to upgrade the gas turbines. But the thing is, it's quite a big space to stick gas turbines. It traditionally carries 2. And if I remember correctly, the 2 it carried. It carried LM 2500 30s, which the 2 of them combined provided 31 megawatts. If we go for, let's see, the Independence class, They carried LM-2500, the latest generation of LM-2500s, and they've now jumped up in power again. Yeah, they have jumped up. Yeah. We are now talking. Okay. For the OHPs, they are rated at 16 megawatts, 16,000 kilowatts. Okay. In terms of power, the latest ones which have been fitted to things like the Queen Mary 2 and even the Navy ones are at roughly 30 megawatts. So if you've even got the two latest gas turbines, you'd be upgraded to something like 60 megawatts from the 30 megawatts. So yeah, you could there would be power there, is what I'm saying. You could do this. It's going to require you to fit the new gas turbines, but you could have you've got the design. You can work it out. It's fun times. So, yeah, I think it is the power is not an area which I'd be worried too much about, considering they were the early stage of gas turbine inclusion, and their gas turbines were, compared to today's ones, very low generating. But this means, what does the USN look like today? And that's interesting, because you start thinking about it today. One of the reasons why the Burke is so dominant is because the Burke is a reliable, politically trusted program, which keeps churning out ships, which means it is trusted by the Senate. It's not going to blow up in their faces. If they order more Arleigh Burkes, they're not going to look bad. No one is going to critique them for ordering a Burke. No one is going to be upset them for ordering a Burke. If the OHPs survive into the 90s, they become like that. Now, potentially, there are still attempts to replace them. But I wouldn't be surprised if, for much the same reason as the Burkes have carried on being built, they would have carried on being built. And that becomes a thing which the US Navy is basing itself around. It has two programs. It has a constant build of what it would call a smaller combatant, a supporting combatant, a good, solid, basic combatant, but that's it, and an advanced combatant, a large combatant program. And suddenly that becomes a useful asset. Now, I think in this scenario, you potentially see the independence and freedom program still go ahead. The Zumwalts probably still go ahead. But they're going to look different, because it's going to look like the US Navy has a good, solid program, and these ships are the US Navy developing the future. And the US Navy can very quickly mark it as, well, we're putting in some risks. It might blow up in our face, but putting in some risks, we're able to do this because we've got X and Y as our reliable assets. We've got the Burkes, we've got the Perrys. Yeah, I think the wiki has. I think that's the current in production variants of the LM-2500 KVG, not the ones which have been in production in the in the 70s. Yeah, things have improved a bit. Looking at the stats, it's a case of there are options. They're certainly good, but so this gives them production. This gives them capability. This gives them numbers. And that's a different US Navy. See, as I said, a US Navy which has 140 modernish combatants. 140 modernish combatants. Remember, no, we're talking roughly 35 frigates and 35 Perrys, 35 LCS, and 75 Burks. Maybe more. Maybe, you know, it's 36 and 36. Who knows? Suddenly looks a very different force structure. When you start talking about it going, well, okay, yes. Are the Perrys going to be adding a lot to the missile strike capability? Well, if they've gone to 48 VLS, they won't be adding a lot, but each one's toting along half the cells of a Burke. And that suddenly means that's quite useful. Half the cells of a Burke. It also has positioned the US Navy with quite a nice sort of formula for their frigates. Okay, so what are we building as a destroyer? Our frigate carries half the VLS cells. And that's actually the thing. The biggest thing this would do with an ongoing program is it would actually make it easier to replace because you'd have a benchmark to build against. You wouldn't be building against an imagined benchmark. You wouldn't be building against a benchmark which has been gone for the last 10 years. You wouldn't be building against a benchmark which might be inappropriate for it. You have got a benchmark which exists, which is under construction to go, right then, what do I need to have something better than this? Okay. And that makes life easiest. Yeah, the latest introduces 35 megawatts. 35,000 kilowatts. Yeah. That's a fun one, isn't it? KVG. Basically, it's theoretically, therefore, you could get them up to, with 2 gas turbines, they would have 70. Of course, and that's 2005. So, yes. Imagine what the current generation of gas turbines will provide you with. So, yeah, lots of potential for power, lots of potential for capabilities, lots of potential for giving a Navy flexibility in terms of production. That's the other thing I'd like to point out, is if you have this as a consistent production program going on, you also then have another level of command structure. And you have the ASW warfare capabilities being kept quite strong in terms of the surface ships, in terms of having focused assets for them. And you probably, this is going to sound strange again, but probably there's a good chance that the Perrys end up being the vessels which most often get the submarine commanders who are no longer working on submarines but are doing a surface ship tour probably get sent to. You probably end up with quite a few submarine commanders doing a tour in charge of a surface ship or doing their surface ship tour, which some submariners do, especially the ones looking for senior ranks. They usually go, right, and I've got to get some experience of the surface navy, because if I want to go become a fleet commander, I've got to be prepared to someday be part of a surface combat group, you know, carry a battle group, etc. Theoretically, I can go up the entire navy in just submarine postings, but it's far more limited. Whereas if I've got some experience on a surface ship under my belt, I've got far wider range of promotions I can go for and positions I can go for. So I'll do this. And might well be all be looking at the Perrys and going, there we want. I can see there being a fight between the surface navy and subsurface navy over who has the most command posts on them. That being said, we'll go to questions. Now, questions that just come in. Nice to hear everyone. So what would be added if the OHP was 5,000 to 6,200 tons? No idea. Let me be less facetious than that, but let me explain. You're basically adding between 1,000 and 2,000 tons. you're adding 25 to 50% displacement onto that design. Okay? If you're adding that much, you are changing the nature of the build quite considerably. You're increasing the ship by 25 to 50% in terms of displacement. That could be another Mark 13 launcher. That could be a 5-inch gun forward. That could be all sorts of interesting things once you're adding in that amount of weight and that amount of displacement. You're taking something up to a level of capability which is beyond what you need for the basic ship. It's very nice to add on. It's lovely. No one's going to disagree with it. But it's a case of you have now changed that ship fundamentally. Harry John, what's the impact of the Defence Secretary resigning on the Naval Defence? And we'll wake up. And not just the Defence Secretary is resigning, the Armed Forces Minister went this evening as well. And the Armed Forces Minister is the Deputy Defence Secretary, basically, of Defence. So, the two most senior politicians in the UK for the Ministry of Defence have resigned. Now, in a normal circumstance, it should form a government to be very, very worried about what they're about to do. For the current UK government, I have no idea. They've tabled in a massive presentation on Friday, which was supposed to be a massive speech by the Prime Minister on Defence. It was probably where he was going to unveil part of the DIP, the Defence Investment Plan, but probably not the full plan, because that's got to be released in Parliament first. Which is why, mentally, I had scheduled the Defence Investment Plan review for next Thursday. Because it was all supposed to be. But now ministers are resigning. Tomorrow's event may or may not happen, but we might have a Prime Minister who's now bunkering down rather than going near a defence speech, because he's going to be asked, with all your ministers resigning, are you funding it enough? And the answer is going to be no, but I can't say that, can I? And so, yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. I don't think it's going to be any good for anyone, but I can understand why John Healey and Mike, I think it's, what's his name? Ken, isn't it? I always forget his second name. And I do apologise, I know that's on me, I shouldn't forget people's second names. But, you know, I do, but, yeah, with... Oh! I forget. Yeah. Alcans. And yeah, oh good lord. Now, we'll see what happens. New Defence Secretary is a guy called Dan Jarvis, who, if I remember correctly, is pretty good on the fence, but is very army focused. And that might not be who you want at the moment, because basically current defence scenario is that, you know, it's not going to be the army, which is probably getting the funding, and the army's being an issue. Also, he has had issues as the current security minister. And when I say he's had issues, basically he's been hamstrung by his own government. So, seeing as he's been having that issues, we'll see what happens in the UK. But yeah, having met him, actually, Dan Jarvis is fairly decent. But I'm not sure if he's the right defence minister for the moment, because it would have been interesting if they'd not been able to get anyone. But they've got someone, so we'll see what happens. We will see what happens. It's gonna be fun. Almost praise from Alex. Yeah, almost praise. Not quite, because I'm sitting here thinking, as Dan is not, from my experience of him, he's going to need someone who's going to be a pretty aggressive political figure, and Dan has never struck me as being an aggressive political figure. He's more of a consensus one in my experience, but we'll see what happens. Bravo Country, would it be theoretically possible to mount Aegis on a Perry? Not full Aegis, but there is theoretically some lightweight Aegis and various other systems which worked on over the years and which have been fitted to ships which are not that much bigger than a Perry. So it's potentially possible. Jeff, if the OHP continued, how do you think the Constellation program would have progressed if those program was designed to replace the OHP? If they did have a Constellation program, it would probably be based off designs to replace the OHP and probably would have been a domestic build design. But again, if Perry is your benchmark and you've got a modernized Perry, Perry with VLS and those systems as a benchmark, you just basically take that idea and just expand on it. Timu, the boring but competent party, to form it and get it on nationwide platform would take a little bit longer than if there's crash elections happening. We have considered it, though. It's disturbingly become a topic of conversation on more occasions than we like to think. Probably about. It would be quite fun. I don't trust. I will say this. I don't. I have heard many impressive speeches and many impressive promises from all sorts of political parties over the years on defence. So far, I have never heard anyone actually keep them. When I was younger, I might have believed. I'm older. I don't believe any of them. I'm sorry. Because also, you sometimes get completely wild statements being asserted, and people go, we're going to sign up to produce this many ships. How? We don't have the infrastructure to do that. You're going to have to... you're not going to get those ships built, and then it's going to be a new government time. Even if... And this isn't even being nice. Even if you get 2 turns... or 3 turns, you're not going to get that many ships built because you have to build the infrastructure to start building ships. So, yeah. Not going to happen. Well, yeah, basically the Connie in that scenario, as we've already talked about, Constellation class in the scenario of continuing OHPs would be right then, we need to replace the OHPs, we need a new design. Okay, so what are we doing? Well, we're going to take the OHPs as the benchmark, as the base, and just what capabilities do we want to improve? Do we want a new sonar? Do we want more missiles? Do we need more missiles? Do we need to keep the same? That's probably discussions you end up having, and it just ends up being a fairly nice whole. And that's the thing. If you've got an ongoing production, you can do that a lot easier because you have an ongoing benchmark to use. Old and cynical. Yes. And look, I'm old-fashioned when it comes to defense and national security, in that personal politics do not trump nationals. Important. Do not trump national loyalty. I have worked with, and I am happy to work with, pretty much any political party. The ones I draw the lines at are the ones which are hopelessly narrowly focused. In terms of they're blaming everything on a single problem and a single thing, and I just go, no, I'm not going to deal with you because I don't have the energy to deal with you. But when it comes to defence, I have worked with pretty much all the major parties at various points. I have chatted with them. I've been asked about my views on defence. I've been asked to help their papers. Sometimes some of them I've helped with their putting together of their policy documents and these things, and I've been sent emails, and it's been fun. I've been invited to conferences, I've been invited to events to talk about these things and listen and debate and put forward ideas, and I've seen some ideas actually put into the paper and actually put forward as their policy for elections. And that's always been useful. I will work with all of them. Doesn't matter my own personal politics. I will work, as I said, I work with them as long as I think I can actually have a sensible conversation. I will work with them. Because defence and national security matter. It's not something which should be decided by party politics. It's something which should be national priorities, because it matters. But saying that, even having done all that, even as important and as vital as that is, I have not seen anything like sensible ideas put in. Every time I see frenetic action, everyone is always looking for a magic reason of why does Britain spend so much money and get so little out of defence? And they come up with all these wonderful reasons and all these convoluted theories. No, it's very simple. It's because we keep changing our frigating minds. Because every time you're about to get the cheap payoff, because you've already built the infrastructure, you've already built everything, you're just building the final batches of it, we stop building the final batches of things, and we move on to something, the new shiny. And we have to go through all the process again. The problem for the UK when it comes to defence is our attention span, quite literally. There is no big secret, there's no hidden collusion, there's no ideology, there's no people secretly trying to disarm the UK or anything about it. There really isn't. It's not that smart. It is simply the attention span. They want the new shiny and the new headlines. I wish there was a conspiracy theory. A conspiracy theory I could argue with. A conspiracy theory would have logic, would have some smarts going on behind it, would have actually someone thinking. This doesn't have anything of that. This has, defense doesn't matter. What matters is me getting a headline. Oh, that's a new shiny. I'm going to jump on that now. And that's far more depressing. But anyway, we'll get off it. But that's it. It's no big conspiracy theory. It's nothing we want to disarm the UK or anything like that. That would be easier to fight back. That would be easy to argue with. This is just jumping from new shiny and them going, oh, but we're not investing in that because that's old. We're going to go the new newness. This and this and this. And then next 10 minutes, oh, no, the old new newness is now old. We're going to go to new newness. And they have the attention spans of goldfish, I would say, but that'd be being rude to goldfish. I actually quite like goldfish. It's not society's attention span, it's the actual leadership's attention span. That's the problem. Now, Shantanu Kumar. I hope I got that right. 9364. Alex, would an LCS without the pressure of being a frigate, MCMV and LCS at once look like? Probably you'd still have something similar to the Independence and Freedom classes. You probably would still have something like that. But the thing, because the main reason the US Congress couldn't decide between them was because they didn't want to politically upset either sets of constituencies. So they ended up going with both. So you probably end up with something similar to both, but it's going to be a case of it's not going to have the worry about deep sea ASW. It's not going to have to worry about having maybe a large towed sonar array and those systems added in, and those computer systems and the things to support that. It can focus more on its roles. And that'd be interesting. That would add some capabilities. Pull the so a bunch of squirrels and goldfish rule the world. Yeah. It is, and I do agree with Malaga, it truly is. You know, I have often decided that the reason, and this is a discussion I want to have with This idea, the person I met in TwitchCon, who was a really cool VTuber, who is actually the background is all these things, because my view on conspiracy theories is a lot of conspiracy theories are people trying to believe that their leaders are more intelligent than they look like, because they don't want to accept that their leaders are actually stupid. Because if you accept that they're stupid, just like regular humans, there then becomes a question of who did we elect. It is far better for your ego to believe they are part of a malevolent conspiracy than to think they are just idiots. Because if they're part of a malevolent conspiracy, you weren't wrong in voting for them. They looked good on paper. But if they are stupid, then you voted for a stupid person. But yeah, I think the big difference with but actually thinking about it, Shantanu Kumar, between the LCS without having the frigate roles, would be that they could, in many ways, actually potentially shrink in size and focus in on the things they need. They need for their literal combat operations. So more boat handling capabilities, maybe more space to strike missiles, and maybe more focus on the troop transport and the insertion of special forces capabilities. I said, why is the 76mm Mark 75 naval gun not put amidship to not about? Quite simple. Space. Space for where it could be fitted. And it also meant it was... How do I put this? It gave more space for the Mark 13's magazine and all the stuff below deck and the various things you wanted to put in there. So yeah, it's basically space. You'd have had to make the ship bigger to accommodate it having going in front. It's again one of those interesting options once you start hanging in. Just call me Shanks. Okay, Shanks. That's it. That's easier. You know. I'll remember that for next questions when they come in. And if I don't, just remind me. Because I don't have magpie syndrome. I have dyslexia. This is the dirty little secret. Okay, I will admit this as a lecturer. I love teaching and I love the university. There was one advantage to online tutoring to in-person tutoring, okay? One advantage and one advantage only. Their names were on the screen. And there were a couple of students who went, "Aw, you always call me green t-shirt dude. I preferred it when you called me that than my name." And I went, that's because in the nicest way they were like, and that particular module I was teaching, there were like 1,000 students, and I saw them once every 2 weeks in person because there was a switching lecture, and so I didn't really recognise them. I remembered all their names. I wish I could, but there's 1,000 students in that class, and there was this one guy who was quite a tall gentleman who always wore a bright green t-shirt. He always seemed to have a bright green circling t-shirt on, so he was green t-shirt dude. Okay, he had. You always, even in winter, would have sunglasses sitting perched on top of his head and a bright green t-shirt. And he didn't mind being called green t-shirt dude. I'd be quite honest, at the beginning of the year, I go, look, there are 1,000 of you in here. I would love to learn all your names. I will try my best, but some of you will probably get nicknames. I will try. If you find them annoying, tell me. I will stop using them. If you don't mind them, I will probably continue using them. But yeah, I need to have something to call you when you're in class and I'm pointing to you for when I've said stick your hands up for questions and I want to call you out. So that's what I used to do. But yeah. Yeah, green t-shirt. There also used to be TARDIS handbag lady. One of my more mature students, she was a mum of 3, and I joked she was TARDIS about handbag lady because there was always stuff in her in her handbag, always that stuff, and she actually was a Doctor Who fan, and she actually ended up her handbag in the second year when I was still teaching her was actually had a TARDIS logo and everything embroidered on it because she'd taken the TARDIS handbag lady joke because she produced so much stuff from the handbag. She loved it so much she got the handbag made, and she got a generic handbag, and I think she'd got some stuff she'd stitched onto it herself, and she was very proud of her nickname of being TARDIS handbag lady. Again, I know I did actually learn her actual name, but she preferred me calling her by her nickname. And she does occasionally turn up in the chat on Sundays on this channel, so she turns up and she does hear, she hears talk about it, she'll probably chat in and go, because I think actually her YouTube name is TARDIS Handbag Lady now. So, yeah. I think it's THL or THL or something like she calls herself. But, yeah. It was fun times. Anyway, any questions? And we'll do 10 minutes more of questions, then I'll go check on the dogs, and then I'll be popping into Discord to chat away with people. And what else we got coming up? Next week's videos. Oh, let's be honest. Next week's... Britain's destroyers of the Cold War. That's fun. Tomorrow's video is going to be the Squadrons Flotillas explanation video. It was a fun one. It's a fun one to record. It's probably going to be re-recorded tomorrow morning, I have to admit, because I recorded it earlier this week. And one of the reasons why videos haven't gone up this week is we've had the concrete base laid down behind me, and we had it all done. And we've had to have compacting work and other things. So we had a day of compacting, of them going around with the compactor and making sure it was very firm earth for it to go on. And so that was basically a day where you got virtually no recording done, and you had a headache by the end of the day. Because if you've ever heard those compactors, you know they just go the whole time. And then the next day the cement truck turned up. And then we had people making sure the cement, because we've had a lorry and a half cement truck worth of concrete, lorry and a half of concrete put on there, out there. So, yeah, a lot of concrete for the base of what is a single file double garage. So it's able to park 2 cars end to end. It's got a lot of concrete. Anyway, let's look at these questions when they come through. They haven't popped up yet. The jackhammer. I'm not sure if it is a jackhammer. There's some fun going on in UK defence. I've just been alerted that there's been a tweet out by a former Conservative Defence Secretary pointing out that the guy who's just resigned as Armed Forces Minister was one of his best commanders when in post. And you sit there and go, when they served in the Armed Forces, and you sit there and go, okay, this is turning into a very cross-political thing. How about winning the monarch for a defense? About winning the monarch for a defense strategy as a near constant factory over election cycles. Honestly, that I have actually considered in the past as whether or not you make defense a royal duty, and procurement is done by basically a royal commission headed by the monarch, which sits as a permanent sort of. You take the defense select committee, you add the monarch in there, and it becomes an ongoing thing of they assess, they produce a procurement plan, and that is the procurement for the next 5 years of Parliament. Basically, in the first year of Parliament, they produce it, and it becomes the procurement plan for the next 5 years. And then the next Parliament does it next 5 years, and they then monitor it. I am starting to wonder whether you need to move to that sort of scenario and take it out of the political spectrum in terms of the individual government, and you put it on an ongoing team. But again, the UK has a constitutional monarchy. The only reason you'd have the monarch there as that thing is to try and take it out of the churn of defence secretaries and defence ministers that the government produces. So basically, make procurement part of that Royal Commission, that sort of ongoing Royal Security Commission, and you're basically going right. Defence ministers now administer the day to day of procurements and the operations, and they work with Parliament and the funding. But the actual procurement is decided by Parliament, by parliamentary vote, and put forward by the Royal Commission. But they might not get. That's the sort of scenario which then leads to problems, because that's going to provide a competing sense of power centre. And at the moment, the problem the UK also has in terms of defence procurement is we have a government within a government. We have a treasury, which is because of the agreements between Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, where basically Gordon Brown stayed on as Chancellor and didn't cause trouble for Tony Blair, as long as he got to basically be de facto domestic policy god. The legacy of that has put the Treasury in a very dominant position in UK politics, and that doesn't necessarily fit with everything else. Yeah. Knight Security. So with the OHP, what prompted the USN to need them to begin with? Numbers. You need numbers of ships. Cold War, Reagan's build-up, all the other build-ups going on. You need ships. You need hulls in the water. That's what the OHPs were built for at the beginning. Discussed at the beginning. And Jeff, have you seen the LCS Independence frigate concept? Politics aside, I think if it had become the Constellation, it might have been more successful, since Austral might have been able to say no. Potentially, but honestly, the thing is, and I've said this before about the Constellation, is no one could quite decide what they were bloomin' getting. And I did have that fun, where I was actually having the debate with people at one point on, I think it was on my own Discord server. And they were telling me stuff, and I was going, but that's not what they say in their own program document. Oh, no, it's what the US Navy wants, but it's not what the US Senate thinks they're funding. So there is a disconnect going on here. And the US Navy needs to be very careful about that disconnect. And there are all sorts of issues in terms of finalising what was wanted by Congress, what was wanted by the US Navy, and what the actual builders thought they were supplying. And I've said before, you needed someone in the middle going, no, to all of them, and also going, listen, that's what. And ultimately, in the US system, Congress is paying the bills. And how to put this? There are scenarios in life where you can be paying the bills and your involvement in the decision-making process can be minimal. Like, if your parents giving money towards your kid's wedding. Whilst they probably should be inviting you, and you should probably have quite a nice evening, and that would seem fair if you're paying for it, you don't really have decision-making powers over where they get married and who the caterers are and these things, because it's their day. It's your gift to them. However, as I have explained on a regular basis to people recently when it's come to construction in my house, I am currently paying the bills for this construction. So, yes, I do want to know what's being done, and I want it being constructed according to the plans I've agreed with the structural engineer, not according to what you feel like building. Because the structural engineer and I have worked out how to build it so it'll fit with the future needs of this house. And you going what's easier for you is not what I'm going to agree with. Because I'm paying the bill. And so this is ultimately an issue for the US Navy. You have to remember that they have to remember that Congress is paying the bill. Congress can be as frenetic and as indecisive as it wants to be. It's paying the bill. The trouble is with monarchs, especially in constitutional monarchs, is they can usually go, that's enough. Enough is enough. But if they have to do it loudly, if they can't do it quietly, then that's a problem, because very quickly the politicians will try and shut that down. The politicians will try and shut that down because that will cause issues. Okay, Shanks, off topic, but thoughts on what is happening in UK's dip and associated shenanigans? Oh, defence investment plan. It's an absolute nightmare, and I've talked about this a little bit at the beginning. We've now lost the Defence Secretary and the Armed Forces Minister, both resigned today. Defence Secretary is replaced by Dan Jarvis. I'm not sure who's replacing Al Cairns. But yeah, eventually the dip was originally supposed to help cover the 26 to 28, depending on your maths, £1 billion deficit in defence spend in both defence commitments we've signed up to spend money on, i.e. programmes we've got signed up for, and the actual defence budget. Now they've said they're going to reduce it to £13.5 billion. And you sit there and go, and the Treasury wants to take direct control of GCAP, the new fighter program, and all sorts of things. And you sit there and go, oh God, please stop. This is it's getting farcical. And I would agree, to an extent, the current government is due to the fact that no government has funded defence properly for the last 30 years. They haven't. There are tons and tons of issues which have been put up. Half the problems we currently got with fleet availability are due to infrastructure and underinvestment, whereas the infrastructure isn't just about now getting modernised and refitted, and it hadn't been invested in for years. And, we just haven't built enough because we cancelled units, There was originally a theory where you'd have got 3 more astutes. That wasn't followed through on. There's that huge pause in astute construction as they're redesigning between Batch 1 and Batch 2. When realistically it would be sensible to just order another boat built to the Batch 1 standard and just keep building to Batch 1 standard while you're designing Batch 2, so you then can, slot the Batch 2 boats in into production once the design's ready, instead of pausing everything. So you actually have, I think someone worked out you could have fitted an extra 2 astutes in there, which would be kind of useful, let's be honest. And you might have ended up with each increased throughput actually leading to a 4th in as well. You'd end up with a 4th Batch 2 boat, so you'd end up with 5 Batch 1s and 4 Batch 2s of the astutes, which would be 9 SSNs, which is not a massive increase on 6, it's just increased of 50%, but it's probably going to be a massive increase in actual availability and operational capabilities. Especially if you've been funding this sort of things necessary. Again, we talk about the Type 45s. As we said before, those last 3 or 6 hulls, depending on which you want to go with, would have been the cheapest hulls to build. Having 12 would have been useful. If we go to the Type 23s, again, originally they were talking about 24 units. We built 16. We sold off 3 of them, cutting that down to 13. If you built to 24, you wouldn't probably now have the fleet at the size it is now. It would still be small, but it wouldn't be as small, as overworked as it is. And all these things have been a lot of very, very sensible, very logical, short-term cuts. Saving money now that's going to be invested, that's going to provide better defence later, and allow Britain to continue to punch above its weight. And nope. And this has been going on for a long, long time. As I said, I did a video which was basically starts off back in 1997 and goes right up to today, and basically going through it going, yeah, this has been 29 years of fun. Welcome to it. The dip, we will see what happens. But the reality is, we are supposed to get to 3% of GDP on defence in a certain years' time. We're going to get the 3% of the GDP on defence with all sorts of things added in the defence budget, which probably shouldn't be there. I would argue the strategic deterrent shouldn't be there. As much as it is defence, it is not something which you can use for normal operations. It should probably be funded separately out of the Cabinet Office or the Foreign Office budget. Separately. Because it is more a political tool than a military tool. The War Graves Commission, as much as I support the War Graves being funded, I don't think that should be part of defence spending. And the same with the Armed Forces, but the pensions.
Probably shouldn't be included in that. They are. And the thing is, again, when we talk about larger fleet structures, one of the problems with retention, okay, when you're starting to retain people, is people don't see the chance of promotion. So let's say you did have a fleet of 24 Type 23s and 12 Type 45s and 9 astutes. Right then, start thinking that in compared to current hull numbers. Or when we're talking about, 10 years ago building. 10 years ago, we were down to 13 Type 23s, 6 Type 45s, and maybe 6 astutes. Let's go for 6 subs. That's 25 units to command. The other one is 45. So you've got twice as many places for command positions for chief petty officers. You've got twice as many executive officer positions, twice as many captain command positions for captains, and then you've got the other things running through them. Suddenly, it becomes far easier to retain people because if people can see a 20, 30-year career, because here is the thing. Yes, I will need to recruit people. But the biggest problem for defense is always retention of people, because once people get trained, they're useful. And if you ask someone if they are serving, they're doing their first tour of 4 years, or the second tour, or the third tour, what are they looking for? They're looking for opportunities to promote and grow their career. If you think I'm going to get chucked out in my 30s with no chance of promotion or anything else, and I've got a wife and kids, or I've got a husband and kids, and I've got to support them, you're more likely to leave in your late 20s because it's easier to retrain and start your 30s off in a new career. And it's the same. This is one of the problems in that cutting these things becomes part of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you start going, well, it's harder the crew, or we're going to have to pay the crew more, or these sort of issues, and so you cut the hulls. And when you cut the hulls, you cut chances of promotion, chance of senior officer, chance for leadership, chance of a longer career. And the more you do it, the harder you make it, and this is what happens. So yeah. And also, if you have the larger crew personnel, also, it's one of the things of you're far less likely to get burnout if you have a larger pool of personnel. Because you don't have to keep sending people on tour after tour after tour. They don't have to keep going off. They can actually get a home life. They can actually get some downtime. They can go to the training they need. They can go to all the things they need to do. They don't just have to keep going off around the world. So again, quantity is often said as having quality of its own, but quantity also has a... how to put it? Quantity, the larger you are, the easier it is to stay larger. The greater your mass, the easier it is to retain that mass. Because, let's be honest, if you have, as we talked about, 45 captaincy positions, so you need to have, 94 ringers, 90 full captains in the Royal Navy? To sustain those. Maybe a bit more once you add an airbase and those things, and aircraft carriers and all these assets. Fine, yeah, you maybe have 100 or so. You lose a couple of them. That's a couple of captains gone. It's not really going to make a difference. If you're down to 30 or so, and you lose a couple, that's suddenly a big loss. Now, Knight, you're asking an Azur Lane question, and I haven't got my Azur Lane advisors on here, so this is going to be me. I cannot guarantee it. As in Azur Lane, number of HP class are Type 2 rigging. What the rest of Type 1 rigging? Would you want to get the 2 HP riggings into use as soon as possible while building the Type 1s? From my understanding of the gameplay and the system that you're talking about, yes. But I would say I would want to clarify that with my Azur Lane experts.
with that being said, I think, yeah, that's all the questions answered. So, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to say thank you everyone for being here. As said, I'm going to wander check on doggies, and then I'm going to pop onto Discord and chat away with everyone. The Discord server, there is a link below. And yeah, thanks for this. Thanks for being here. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you found it interesting and useful. And, well, just thank you everyone for being here. And as said, we have got more videos coming up. I have got my my happy Excel spreadsheet. My happy Excel spreadsheet. This is the fun I have. This is how I organize. I've talked about this before. How I organize the videos. People believe I don't have notes or plans. I actually have reams of notes and plans. And as people will tell you who were at the talk at the big reward roof, I had a huge stack of notes. I had 30 pages of notes for that talk, sitting there with slides and diagrams and things in my notes. And I didn't refer to them once when I was giving the presentation, because that's what I do. I learn my notes and then I try and present it as best I can. Am I going to raid Drac? How do you raid on YouTube? Because he isn't live on Twitch. He's live on YouTube. I have no idea how you raid on YouTube. I will see what I can do on this front. I will see what I can do. Can I raid? How do I raid? I'm in my stream settings. I'm having a look around. Nope. Nope. No, can't do that. Thank you for all the super chats. There have been quite a couple this evening. Thank you. But yeah. The honest answer is I would say go watch Drac's video. Put a link in the chat, and I will put a link in the chat. That's what I can do. I can do that. That is within the tech scope of my capabilities. That is what I will do. Alright. So, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed. And, right. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. Toodles.